So I recently just discovered a solution to one of my development dilemmas, and I just want to know how you would have solved it. Now the situation is a bit technical, so listen closely. In the game I'm making, I have a player character and a vehicle. Now I guess the type of vehicle doesn't really matter, but for my game, we'll be using a plane. Anyways, when the character gets close enough to the plane, the player can then press the W key, which is to interact. The player can then enter the plane and fly. Now allow me to break down the system behind what you just witnessed. So at the start of every plane interaction, the player script stores a reference to the plane. The player will then be able to fly the plane using that reference. Now note that when the player enters a plane, the player script emits a signal that its state machine is connected to, which will then change its state to in plane. Now similarly, the plane script also emits a signal when the character has entered it, which changes its state to piloted. Now here's the problem. When the plane is landed and the player exits the plane, I want the player to be able to just walk out and be fine. But when the player attempts to exit the plane while the plane is flying, I want the player to be ejected, kind of like this. Now code-wise, I would like to avoid any form of circular reference. Basically, because the player requires the plane reference in order to fly the plane, I'll avoid giving the plane a reference to the player. So since the player can only reference the plane, and the plane doesn't store any data pertaining to its states, so this is the dilemma. How do I access the plane's current states from the player script? Now I'll explain what I came up with at the end of the video, but feel free to tell me how you would have done it. Now let's go over some of the obvious solutions. Now one of the easiest things you could do is just give the plane script a variable to store a reference to the state machine. And then the player could just access the states using something like this. Now let me go over why I think this is problematic. Giving the player or any script a reference to the state machine like this could make it tempting to write code like this, effectively allowing any script to alter the state machine directly, which can become problematic when debugging or trying to pinpoint the cause of a state change later on. Now you could also just connect the state change signal from the state machine directly to the plane. Then you can create another signal in the plane script that's meant to amplify that signal and have the player connect to that. Now the problem I have with this is that it can become kind of cumbersome connecting and reconnecting signals when exiting and entering the plane. And also, if by chance the plane is destroyed while the player is still connected to its signals, you're going to run into an error.
Come on, you guys! There it is, right there in front of you the whole time. You're dereferencing a null pointer. Open your eyes.
Another option would be to just update a variable in the plane script every time the state machine emits the change state signal. Now this would have probably been the option I would have gone with, if not for one major flaw with all of these options. Now the reason why the state machine is separate from all the object scripts is not only because I want to reuse that code, but because it's meant to serve as a component for any object in the game that has multiple states that needs to be managed. Adding any lines of code in an object just to extend the functionality of a component kind of defeats the point of the entire component, because now all objects that have a state machine would then need to add additional lines of code just to make their states accessible to other objects. So many unrelated scripts with the exact same line of code. Now I know what you're thinking, because I thought of it too. Why not just make a new class? That way all objects that have a state machine can just inherit from that. And we'll call them like, just don't. So what I ended up doing was implementing something I believe to be called
attribute-based metadata.
It's basically a way of adding custom properties to an object. And it's available in basically all major engines. In Godot, I use the setMeta function. And in the state machine script, I just updated the state metadata of its parent. Now the player can just access it using the getMeta function. Now I'm only really going to use this to cache data from a component. And yeah, hopefully you found this video useful, and thank you guys so much for 5K.